You're in a trench getting shot at. There is nothing you can do. Out of nowhere, a man comes over the top of your trench, bringing with him a gun and a trench periscope. Using surprise, you kill him with your bare hands and take his stuff. Quickly, you take the periscope and look out of your trench. There's nothing, just the shred of bullet from one of the machine guns. You're safe. For now. There is a dilemma about the significance of a person in war. On one hand, the person contributed little to nothing compared to the huge scale of wars, such as that in which George fought. But on the other hand, without the soldiers, there would be no war. This video, I will tell you the story of George Dickson Baird, a man who served in the Canadian Expeditionary Forces in World War I. I will also tell you about the vast significance of the trench periscope throughout the First World War. George was a soldier like many others. He had likely seen the propaganda about the glory of war and had decided to enlist to join the war effort. He, along with his close friend Edward, joined into the war effort just before Christmas on December the 15th, 1915. They were then shipped out to France and arrived in Boulogne-sur-Mer on the 11th of March 1916. As they got assigned positions, George moved further inland towards Verdun, where he then fought in the Battle of Verdun all through the summer and into December, when they finally emerged victorious. During this battle, he got a trench periscope from someone who had likely been shot. George was most likely a careful man, and in a battle like this, one thing that kept him going was likely the thought of seeing his parents and sister again. He didn't want to spoil that by getting shot. Throughout the 7 months he was there, he killed 2 men. One thing to know about the Germans is that in World War I, they used a lot of mines, and a battle like this was no exception. So it should have been no surprise that the Germans had laid their trenches with mines before they went back to retreat. George was one of the last to go over the trenches, and that was good because he might have been killed by a mine had he not. Throughout the next 2 years, George fought with tooth and nail, partaking in 2 other battles, the Battle of Saint-Quentin-Canal in 1918 and the Battle of Cambrai in 1918. Both of the battles were decisive victories for the Allies. He also spent a year building infrastructure in the railway corps. During a battle, on one occasion, George might have been looking out of a trench using his periscope and noticed a sniper facing at a man beside him from a position across from them. Then something happened which drastically changed George's behavior. As far as I know, it is not issued on any records that George's friend Edward ever came home from battle, so it is most probable that he got fatally wounded or sick. In total, George killed around 3 to 5 people. He himself didn't even suffer any major injuries, thanks in no small part to the trench periscope. In 1919, when George came home, he was a different man. He had become his own and had also mild shell shock. Just like Canada had become its own, even signing for itself in a whole peace treaty, the Treaty of Versailles. George had become more independent, self-sufficient, and self-governing. The Periscope. Although the periscope was invented in the late 1850s, it wasn't until the First World War that the trench periscope was created. Just so you know, a periscope is a box or cylinder that is made of 2 45-degree mirrors on the top and bottom, which make the person looking through it see the view from the top of the periscope. This was great for not getting shot in battles. Even then, it was quite primitive, and for the Allies it stayed that way, consisting of only a wooden shaft that you could look down or up with 2 mirrors. The Germans also used periscopes, although theirs were like binoculars. There were two round shafts with two mirrors, but also with lenses, which allowed the users of these periscopes to look long distances with great ease. And although periscopes weren't very widespread throughout the army, people did have some. Throughout all of World War I, the number of lives saved by periscopes was about 50 to 100,000 lives. The role of the trench periscope in the war was a preventative measure, so that people could look out of the trenches without running the risk of being shot by the enemy. The model of periscope I was given, and most likely was used by George, was used by the French and the Brits with all of their subjects, mostly on the Western Front. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians used a better periscope that could zoom in and out. The modern-day equivalent of the trench periscope is most likely cameras, which are put all over places which are occupied by first world countries. That is because people are a lot more valuable compared to the equipment, and it'll directly affect the number of people who volunteer to fight. Countries care a lot more about their soldiers and don't want them to die, so they try to protect them using technology. People aren't the best weapon the military has anymore. In my opinion, the trench periscope should have been way more remembered than it was because of its great job protecting the lives of so many Canadian, American, British, French, German, Russian, and other soldiers. The effects and historical significance of World War I. World War I is one of the most significant events in modern human history. It was one of the direct causes of World War II. It also showed the racist Europeans that they were, in their eyes, as barbaric as their African, American, and Asian subjects. If there were no World War I, almost all of our core values would be different from how they are now. I cannot understate the amount of change that was caused by the First World War. Due to World War I, there was a societal shift towards political ideologies. World War I showed the religious populations of Europe that there was no God, because if there were a God, God wouldn't let something like this happen. To fill their ideological gap, they went to more extreme political-based ideologies like socialism, Nazism, nihilism, neoliberalism, and anarchy. A lot of great political theorists lived around that time. Take, for example, George Orwell, the writer of 1984. Instead of finding meaning in believing in a higher deity, people found meaning in believing in an ideology. Shift to more political and less religious ideologies is still present today. It also shaped almost all of pulp culture in the 20th century. Geopolitics were also greatly affected by it, making countries also get alliances based on political models rather than just culture. World War I was also a drastic change for Canada. Before World War I, Canada was just another domain of the mighty British Empire, but throughout the war, Canada really came into her own. The decisive victories of the Canadian Armed Forces made the people fighting in them have their own nationalism. As one of the men who fought at Vimy Ridge said, "It was the first time we really felt Canadian and not just like a dominion of Britain." If there were no war, then Canada would have stayed in the servitude of the fatherland. Canadian culture would have never came into its own. Canada would have stayed British. And you can't talk about World War I without talking about Germany. If there were no World War I, Germany would have been a lot stronger and probably would have annexed or puppeted Austro-Hungary after it eventually fell apart. In the end, World War I changed all of Western society drastically as a whole, and it's up to you to make up whether it was for the better or the worse. Anyways, please subscribe, and thanks for watching. See ya!